So I'm Wade Conlon with Hanson Professional Services. I lead our commissioning and energy group. With me today and carrying me through this presentation is Krista Barsante. She's one of our commissioning and energy specialists, and she spent a lot of time and effort on this project here at Charlotte. So with that, we're going to do some of the housekeeping items. AIA, it's copyrighted, it's in the app, so you know you can actually see the PowerPoint presentation. If you want to take pictures, great, but in reality, you have the hard slides. The learning objectives that were used to make sure that you could get the CEUs for this course, but in reality, we're going to be talking about, just covered on the agenda, which is relatively simple. I'm going to give you an overview of the airport. Who all flew through the airport this week? Cool. All right. So you have firsthand experience. Appreciate it. If I get those field observation reports in 3 days, that would really help me out. Talk about the systems that we actually commissioned. Chris is going to walk through a lot of those systems, the little nuances of those things, different things that we saw with each one of those systems. We're going to dig in pretty deep into the baggage handling, because that's one that's a lot different than what most people are used to doing. And talk a little bit about badging security, and then scheduling of testing at an actual live airport. Trying to leave enough time for Q&A. Everyone is welcome to ask questions, except for Amy Pastor, because it's going to be very difficult. You're out. I'm kidding, of course. So with that, let's get to it. So you all flew through it. It's a large airport. It's over 2 million square feet. It's 124 gates. So yes, when you're going from one gate to the other and it feels like you're walking through a lot of people movers, et cetera, that is true. There are a slew of tenant concessions, but the people throughput is close to 60 million a year, which is a nice size airport. They also have other facilities that are part of the airport that are separate from what that is. We did not touch those. Come on. So as far as this project is concerned, so it's Charlotte Airport Concourse A Expansion Phase 2. Thankfully for us, they call it CAP 2. So if you hear Krista or I use CAP 2, that's what it is. It was only 190,000 square feet. That's an actual image of the expansion. Only 10 new gates, a lot of tenant concessions areas that we'll touch on in a little bit. One of the biggest things was the new baggage unit that actually connected to the existing baggage system for the entire hospital. Yeah, good job, Wade. Airport. And we'll talk on HVAC systems. So aerial view, you can see this is the actual airport. The red box is around where CAP 2 is. The first blue piece is CAP 1, CAP 2 is the next one. So, but that doesn't really tell you exactly. So we did another one from the actual airport website so that you can see. So for those that fly in, wow, don't want to get too close to that. But you can see D and E are off to the side, but you can see all the different components of it. CAP 2 is essentially a whole other set of gates than CAP 1, which was done only like, I don't know, 9 years ago or something. So from that standpoint, that's the area of work for the airport. That's the 190,000 square feet that we got to deal with. At this time, like I said, I really do mean it. She's carrying me. Krista's going to walk through the different systems.
So I'll talk about some of the systems at the airport that are pretty familiar to anyone who's worked on MEP commissioning projects, and I'll go through some of the issues that we found so that you can be on the lookout for them on your own projects, and then we'll get into that more exciting baggage handling system. So starting off with the air distribution, they had 8 air handlers on this project. It originally was only going to be 7, but then during construction, they added a separate area off of the boarding level that required the addition of a whole another air handler. So ended up being 8 in total. Each of these air handlers have 4 supply fans and 4 return fans. One of the things that we found with commissioning this is that these variable speed fans were not rated for 60 hertz on the VFDs. They're actually rated much higher than that. And I know that a lot of times we think of 60 hertz as that limit, but in reality, that is imaginary. We can go above that, even if it feels weird, as long as the motors are not within that service factor. One thing that we found, though, is that because people are so used to hearing that 60 hertz value, there was someone unknown at the airport who every time we came out on site, we would see that those VFDs had been reset back down to 60 hertz. Every single time we came out. And it makes sense because they were at very strange numbers. You know, it'd be 83 hertz or so. It feels weird, feels wrong, but it was right. And so every time we were out there, our mechanical contractors, they would diligently set it back to the right number. So this was one of the issues that we found. And of course, we are not there every single day to tell them, hey, go set it back to the right number. So making sure that the owner is aware of that and that when they're doing their owner's training, they need to let them know that, hey, this is okay. And also, we recommended adding some signage to, again, make people more aware that that is the case and that it doesn't need to be at 60. We also had one ERV serving 4 of those air handling units. This provided preconditioned outside air to the units. And then there were also some VAVs. These were primarily for the office spaces on the lower ramp level, as well as near some of the gates. So wherever there was a lower ceiling, you could have VAVs, but there were a lot of spaces that had high ceiling, VAVs wouldn't work there. And there were also a lot of windows throughout that boarding level. If you, again, a lot of you went through the airport, so you saw lots and lots of windows. So they also had these radiant panels at the base of all the windows on the space. You can find these in both the CAP 1 and CAP 2 projects. These are hot water radiant panels. They are floor mounted at the base of the window. So they did add these end caps that can protect the end so that if someone walks by, they accidentally touch it, they're not gonna get burned. Or I've even seen people sitting on these. So making sure that they're not getting too hot, but they are helping to mitigate some of that cold air that might be coming in through the windows in the winter. And you can see in the top right here, their hot water lines are coming straight from the bottom. So there is that lower ramp level right below it. So that is where those hot water lines come in from. And the hot water is connected to the existing airport system, same for the chilled water. So there was piping from the CAP 1 project that was capped off, and they were able to continue this piping throughout the new CAP 2 expansion. So our project, we did not actually test the chillers and the boilers, but we were more so testing that this new project was functioning well, being tied into that existing system. So making sure that no other areas in this airport were starved of water to their own equipment. And so when we tested the pumps that were connected to these new systems, we were making sure that the differential pressure set points were met, the flow was being met, and believe it or not, we actually did not have any open issues for the contractors when we tested these pumps. Everything passed on the first time, and it was a little miracle because that's pretty rare when we're doing testing, so it was nice. Next up, we had the emergency power system. They had a 1,000 kilowatt emergency power generator for the project. This is serving their emergency lighting, their telecom rooms, their fire sprinklers, anything that you would need active still in an emergency. So they had a 24-hour load test, a 24-hour burn-in to test this generator, and we were intended to be there to witness the testing. And one thing that kept happening with this, which is pretty typical on commissioning projects, is that the testing schedule just kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And especially given that it is such a long test, just a friendly reminder to everyone that communication is so important on commissioning projects. When you're trying to get different contractors out on site, you need to be communicating when those changes happen so that everyone can attend, everyone can plan for it. But also then on our end, since we're going to witness, we have to be able to be flexible with their schedule changes. We also had building envelope or building enclosure testing. We did have a sub-consultant who worked with us to do this, and that was HPB Solutions, carried out by Megan. She did a really, really great job of making sure that the building envelope was tested in accordance to these ASTM standards. And as you can see here, there's this roof uplift testing going on. This was fairly early in construction compared to when we did our testing, so I will say that this roof that's a little dirty, it did, of course, get cleaned afterwards. Some other systems that we had in the airport included fan coil units. There were several electrical rooms as well as telecom rooms that had a lot of crucial equipment for CLT operations. So they had these fan coil units in there to cool the spaces. There were also unit heaters, exhaust fans, and both tank and tankless water heaters that we tested. And then we did test the fire alarm integration into the HVAC system, making sure that all the air handlers shut down if the fire alarm went off. The lighting controls, there was minimal control within the BAS. It was just the exterior lighting that was on a schedule set by CLT to make sure that the planes have visibility as they're pulling into those gates. And then lastly, we have the baggage handling system, which we're going to go a little more in depth about here. So the baggage handling system, just to give a little overview of how it works in an airport, if you've never gotten the privilege to see it in this form before, when you drop your bag off, or if let's say you are connecting from one flight to another, your bag goes through a series of conveyor belts to ultimately get to your airplane. And throughout these conveyor belts, it's a very complex network. There are tag scanners that are regularly scanning the tag on your bag to make sure that it's heading to the right place. And so that was the basis of the testing that was done. The testing was carried out by BMP, who is an expert on baggage handling testing, and then we were there on behalf of the owner to make sure and kind of have like a commissioning verification process. So I got to witness a lot of cool stuff with the baggage handling testing. The general process of the test is that you started a bag at a certain point, and you want to make sure that it lands at the correct spot. Ultimate goal, right? Everyone wants their bag to get to the right spot. So the way that they did this is they would print a tag and they would actually tape it to a bag tub. Most of these tests were not done with an actual suitcase. It was just a little tub. They would tape it to the bottom of it, and then they would set it at a certain starting point, depending on what the test sequence suggested. And then it would go through the scanner and, again, ultimately land at whatever was the intended destination. So the way that they would simulate some of these things is, let's say that you had a bad read on your bag, right? To simulate that, they might put another tray on top of that tub so that the tag would be covered up. You wouldn't be able to see it, and that's how you would simulate not being able to scan it. So that's kind of generally how it works, and then in just a second I'll get into some of the specific test sequences, but this is what the conveyor belts look like. This was early on in that construction phase. So there's actually another layer of conveyors heading over this, and it goes in multiple directions. It's a very complex thing. You can't really walk through it the same way that you can in this picture. Also, while we are looking at this, if you remember when I mentioned the radiant panels earlier, that those pipes came down, straight down, this is the area that they came down to. And so you could see that there's this kind of complex piping network heading on top of here. So contractors did a really great job color coding everything, and just is looking real nice and beautiful there. So to get into some of the testing scenarios for the baggage testing, first is they have two kind of processes. One is the automatic computer system. That is best case scenario. They also have the manual encode system. So that's if something goes wrong, your bag will then get diverted over to that area where someone will manually input. So with the computer system, the first test that I was able to witness was sorting by bag tag to the new makeup carousel. When I say makeup unit, that is this carousel right here. This is below the new gates. So if you are flying out of this new Cap 2 area, this is directly below where all of those gates are. And so this is where your bag will come before it gets to be put on the airplane. So they started the tub that I mentioned earlier with the tag. They started it upstream of one of those scanners. It went through the scanner. It recognized, hey, it's supposed to go to this carousel here, and then it did. Next is no read or lost bag. So there are kind of two scenarios that could happen with this. The first one is that it goes through one scanner and the scan is good. Then the second scanner, it for some reason isn't able to read the tag. What happens then with that is that it still actually makes it to the correct destination because the first scan was good, and so it uses that information from the first one to still get it where it needs to go. The second option is that both scans are bad, and the bag it's unsure where it needs to go, it doesn't know how to get there. So what happens is it then gets diverted to that manual encode location that I mentioned earlier. This manual encode testing is pretty similar process to the way that the computer system is tested. So it's again just testing these different scenarios, making sure that if they were to manually input this bag needs to go here based on the carrier, or based on the flight number, or based on the makeup unit, that it does get over there. But back to the automatic testing. Next is overhype bags. So this is anything looking fun and funky and too tall or too long. So for example, if any of you brought your golf clubs for the tournament this weekend, that might qualify as one of these overhype bags. So for the overhype bags, there are again 2 different scenarios that could happen. One is that and it just depends on where it's at in the conveyor system. So one option is that it goes and it gets diverted to a different location because as I said, it's a little bit tight quarters. Once they had all those conveyor systems installed, your bag might not be able to fit. You don't want to damage your bag or your equipment. So that's the first option. Or the second option is if you're on a path where there is no room for your bag, what they'll instead do is your bag actually gets stopped on a small portion of the conveyor belt. So everything around it is still moving, but your bag gets stopped and then there's an alarm generated where someone will have to come manually take off your bag. And another aspect that was really interesting to see is that there is a control room for the baggage handling system. There are a lot of employees at the airport working so hard to make sure that if something goes wrong, they're constantly looking at a map of the whole system, and if an alarm comes up, they send someone to go and look at this and make sure that your bag gets the right place. I know it's not a flawless system. I've had issues with my bags before, but they are really working hard to try and make sure that that doesn't happen. The last thing that I got to see was a 200 bag sortation. So this was actually 200 suitcases, and we sent them all at the same time to a couple different locations, and we made sure that the correct quantity of suitcases ended up at each location. These tests were not flawless on the first try. There were a couple of them that they did have to retry. So some of those no reads, they had to try a couple of times, but it was something that they were able to troubleshoot on the spot, which was really interesting. And so we were able to repeat the test, and everything that I actually saw was able to be a pass. Next up, I want to talk a little about badging and security at the airport. We know that that is an incredibly important part of an airport, and it does impact the commissioning process a little bit. So first off, some terminology is we have SIDA, which is the Security Identification Display Area. This is exactly as it sounds. So if you are in a SIDA space, you need to have a badge displayed on your person at all times, indicating that you are allowed to be in that space. And it needs to kind of be in the mid-range of your body so that other people can see it. And all airport employees are expected to hold each other accountable. So if you see someone who doesn't have their badge displayed, you're supposed to ask them about it. And I believe that airport employees are actually tested on that. So they will have people walk past who, they get tested. So they'll have people walk past who don't have a badge, and it'll be like a fail on their part if they don't call that person out. So, kind of a checks and balances to make sure that we're keeping the airport as secure as possible. So early on in this CAP 2 project, it was not part of a SIDA space. There was a fence that divided us from the rest of the airport, and we were able to just drive up on site, and it was nice and good and easy. But then as construction went on and we were connecting to the active airport, they did have to take down that fence, and we are officially part of the SIDA area. And so that meant that we at Hansen, as well as our subconsultants, we had to go and through the badging process. So this consists of a few steps. First was fingerprinting. So you go get your fingerprints taken, they'll do a background check on you. Then you have to go in for a second appointment where you do your SIDA training. So this is about an hour-long training where they kind of teach you all the ins and outs of the security process and what you're expected. So kind of like I said, you need to have your badge in a certain location. That's the kind of things that you're learning about in this training. So I mention this just because this is an added part of the commissioning process. A lot of times if you're commissioning a school or something, you're able to just walk onto the site, right? It might be summertime, it's a new construction, so school hasn't, these kids haven't moved into the new school yet. You can just come on in and it's super easy. But there are a lot of added layers just to get the badge. Then once you have your badge, you do still have to go through a somewhat less intense TSA process. You have to go through security. Jonathan, who's here in our audience, he got to experience that as well. He helped me with our testing, but he's unbadged, so I was escorting him, which meant that he had to stay within my vision at all sites. And because he was unbadged, when we went through security, they were definitely very thorough with us. They checked all of our bags. They were making sure that everything looked good. You fortunately still can bring your water and stuff in. They're not going to tell you can't hydrate on the job, but it is still, an added process when you're getting to the site. You can't just walk on. You have to plan at least another 10, 15 minutes into your time. This picture up here shows the color coding of the different types of badges. So again, just different levels of what people can and can't do. And then there are additional privileges. So I mentioned I had the escort privileges, so I can escort up to 3 people who don't have a badge. There's also driving privileges, things like that. This is a map of the airport area. So the CAP 2 project is up in the top left, so it's not updated on this map yet. But the whole terminal is gray, and this is because it is the sterile area. So this is, you have to have that badge displayed, and you have to go through security to be in this area. Outside of that is the gray area. This is the tarmac. What's actually pretty neat is that my badge, when I was doing commissioning, allows me out there, which was kind of neat to just get to walk around the tarmac. But also, you want the right people to be doing that. So that's why this badging process is so important. You need to be able to trust that the people who are out there are doing the right thing. And then lastly, we have this AOA/SIDA area, so that not only do you have to have your badge, but that just stands for Air Operations Area. So these are the runways where the planes are actually taking off. As far as access testing goes, this was originally part of our scope to test the security doors throughout this area. This was removed then from our scope by CLT because they have to do their own testing anyways per TSA standards. So they said, since we gotta do this, don't worry about it. But to talk a little about what the security doors include is every single one has a camera, a blue horn strobe light that will be very loud if you do the wrong thing, and everyone will turn their heads to look at you. An entrance card reader, so you have to scan that badge to get in, and then either an exit card reader or motion sensor to get out, depending on the space type. So there are telecom rooms that are pretty secure to the airport. You have to scan your badge to get out. Even though there's only one door in, one door out, obviously if you got in, you should be cleared to get out. You still have to scan that badge again. And then there is an alarm generated if the door is propped open or if it is opened without a correct badge scan. And then as far as the building automation system goes, while we were testing, I know that sometimes on projects, clients are able to give us remote access, which can kind of help speed things along sometimes in our testing when we're working alongside the controls contractor. We did not have this on the CLT project just because of security purposes. They keep that in the hands of their controls contractor. And even the controls contractor, they had several levels of authentication that they had to go through in order to get into the BAS. Sometimes it was tedious, but again, all about security at the airport. And now I want to pass it back to Wade to talk about our schedule.
Cool. I'm live, right? I did. Look at me commissioning my own microphone. How good am I? So a little bit on schedule. Krista went through all those different systems, so hopefully you have some questions for her later that she'll, be able to answer and talk about. But from that standpoint, now a quiz. Sorry. What hours do you think that you're actually going to commission these baggage handling systems? We can see the answers up there. I am going to actually do a show of hands. We're going to count exactly numbers, right? Someone might actually win a prize, a drink ticket, if you will, if they're the first to get it right. But from that standpoint, you can see A, B, C, and D. So seriously, honestly, by a show of hands, who thinks the testing happened between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m.? All right. Who thinks it happened between 5 and 11? Fair enough. Between 11 and 3 a.m. Number of hands went up. Very nice. And between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m. The rest of the hands. So an exact count, right, Krista? You counted them all? Yeah. So, keep in mind, it is an existing system that it's active, right? Yeah. Yeah, we were connected to the entire rest of the airport. So, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. So thanks to Krista for being part of that testing. But when you think about testing, we always talk about it in days. And you're always like, oh yeah, we got two-person days, 5-person days. That's a 4-hour window. She just told you it takes 15 minutes to get through security. You have to make sure that everyone is actually there and prepped and ready to get going so that in that 4-hour window, because you'll see many times here where we say is you could not disrupt the operation of the actual airport when it was going on, right? Come on. Did it? All right. All right. So this is a later on picture from construction. You can see the lower conveyor. The yellow piece up top, if you will, that does work, yeah. That's actually the platform walkway. Tucked in, just in there, is a little bit more blue, and that's the second layer of conveyor. So when she was saying it was squished in, it's really jammed in there. So be able to access and look at these different things. And so from that standpoint, we had to test in the window of that. Just wanted to see the other piece to it. Another issue in terms of the airport was tenant spaces. And luckily for us, the tenant spaces were completely separate projects outside of our scope. And so completely separate that I was a different general contractor. I was different designers. The only thing consistent was the controls team, maybe Tab. But from that standpoint, guess whose schedule didn't align with our schedule, right? We're sitting there, we're testing our systems, and So from that standpoint, these tenants like the Sky Club, right? It was on a different time frame. So the VAV boxes, the water side going to it, it really did mess with Tab and commissioning. I swear I'm pressing the button. Okay. So the image on the right-hand side is what was in our base project, which was a VAV with hot water reheat capped off for the tenant to pick up. So we looked at our project schedule and we said, okay, we can only test so much of this system. We can't test everything. We have to wait for the rest to be done. So we did as much as we could on the air handling units to try and get it through the process. Because guess what? It was running. It was working. Test as little as we could, as much as we could on a VAV box that, oh, by the way, the air goes nowhere, right? What happened is they finally got tab complete on the tenant spaces so that we knew that the air was balanced downstream of the VAV box, that it had the right airflow, it was making the temperature it needed to, et cetera. But by the time they got done, the airport was open. So it was already turned over. So now we walked into another scenario of, hey, what window are you allowed to test in? Plus, on our side, the air handling unit with the VAV boxes, they had to do their final checks. The air CLT said, that's great. You can start at 7 p.m. Once again, you're now working in a different odd hour, different window, trying to make sure that everyone's ready. Right? So from that standpoint, that eventually got completed, which should be this next slide. So Krista actually got to go to the grand opening, September 17th, 2024. We still had a few issues remaining. We still had some areas that we had to test that were tenants to be handed over. And so this was their directive to us. You can see it up here. I hate to read, but you had to send a notice of work to CLT. They had to approve your notice of work. And it was very clearly, when you were signing off on this notice of work, it was systems to be checked out could not disrupt airport operations. Now, there's a running joke that I've had with different commissioning providers over the years is, how do you know that you've tested a chiller plant? Or how do you know that you've properly tested an air handling unit? You know the answer. Come on, say it, Amy. Say it. You shut it down. You've done something where all of a sudden it trips and you go, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. But this note here clearly says you are not allowed to do that, right? I had one at a lab job that we did, and the guy was big enough and the boilers were big enough, and he said, if you shut my chiller plant down, I'm going to throw you in the boiler and I'm going to turn it on. That was the last time I intentionally said, it doesn't matter if we shut anything down. And when I say he was big enough, large enough, physical enough to actually do that, and the boilers were very big enough to put me in, it was fine. But from that standpoint, that's what Krista got to deal with, is making sure that those notice of work orders, working with the different contractors, going back to that communication of how are you going to orchestrate and make sure that you can go check that the last VAV box temperature is reading properly off the heat, right? A minor little thing is a lot of paperwork to get into to get through that. So that's one of the things that you need to make sure in terms of scheduling. So simple conclusions. Obviously, security impacts the commissioning process. The baggage handling system, which to me is, I don't know, I think you should have paid me. You had so much fun with the baggage handling system. But now, from that standpoint, no, it's a unique and different system that you got to see. Get to see other people doing tests. And we were fortunate that CLT said, yeah, we want you to be our eyes and ears. You're going to be our owner's rep. You're not going to execute the FPTs, but you're going to be there to see that every FPT step actually does get to happen. So it was pretty interesting to do. And then with active airports, as we all kind of deal with certain active buildings, just a different level in terms of it requires a lot more scheduling, a lot more planning, a lot more making sure that at 11 p.m. people are ready to go, because guess by the way, you're done testing at 3 a.m. So it's a little bit shorter window. Please complete the evaluation online. And this should be, yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. Questions? Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Christy, Wadi. It was very excellent presentation and very informative. I was just get confused with one thing. You said this is an expansion. So if it's an expansion, it wasn't occupied during the commissioning. So why it was so hard to do it during evening hours or during like special hours if it's an expansion and not occupied yet?
So I'll give an answer and then you correct me. Is that cool?
Sure.
All right, good. So a lot of the process was normal construction hours when it was a separate. Remember, she talked about the chain link fence and we weren't part of the secure area. So they were treating us as our separate area. So we tried to do as much as we possibly could. As soon as that fence came down, they then considered us part of the active airport. In which case, then they said, even though your air handling unit or this piece or that part, but definitely that conveyor system, the baggage handling, it was fully connected. So if you flew in an E and your bag would then get shipped through that and then come in over the other side. From the ticketing side, when someone checks in, it had the ability to still come over to this side.
But the eight air handling units are just only for that space.
Correct. Correct. So we did as much as we possibly could.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, but the tenant spaces were the additional part, and that's why some of our testing had to get pushed after it was already open. It's because those tenant spaces were feeding off of the air handlers that we were supposed to.
So to
be
do a
testing.
static pressure reset test.
So you mentioned that
V boxes functional, right? So we had to come back check some things, not everything.
Okay. So you mentioned that 4 of these air handling units are connected to one. ARV. What about the other 4? Why they have only one?
Well, we would have to ask the engineer of record, but they wanted mixed air.
So are they bringing fresh air through the other 4 air handling units, or just?
There were DOAS units there with an ERV inside them, right? If I can remember correctly.
The other 4 were. Sir, we'd have to dig back in. It's been a while. It's been open for a little bit.
There might have been like other intake for the air handling units, but they weren't connected to the precondition outside air that came from the ERV. So
back to the hot water, chilled water system pumps. You said you was able to verify that these pumps are serving the other areas without having any problem by connecting the new area to it. How did you do that? I mean, did they provide you some information about the existing areas that are served by these pumps, or were you able to monitor the other systems, or how did you do that?
So it's actually the chillers and boilers that were existing. The pumps were all serving the new space. So any pumps that were previously installed, those were serving old spaces, but they're all connecting into the same chillers and boilers. So the pumps that we tested were only for this new space. So we didn't
I thought you said the pumps are for...
So the pumps for this area are tertiary pumps. But when we run tertiary pumps, you have to actually, what she was trying to say about the existing plant is you've got to look back at the existing plant because it could potentially negatively impact the
Yeah.
boiler or the chiller.
So how did you know if it's,
Fortunately for us, it's one BAS.
Yeah.
Right. So, and they had, it's one that they have consistent, so they had good information and knowledge
so
on.
you was still monitoring the other areas during that period?
More so for looking
to
for
make
plant
sure.
stability, right? When we ramp the pump up, ramp the pump down, is the chiller plant reacting like you would expect it to react, right? We weren't actually testing it, but it's more of the responsibility to make sure that these new pumps didn't really negatively impact the plant operation. The tertiary, yeah.
Yep.
Just to add on what Wade said before about the do not disturb clause, do not disturb airport operations. I remember explaining, we were on a call with the airport administration, and we explained that to verify all the sequences of operation, there'd be very limited downtime, like we'd have to shut down a unit for a few minutes at a time just to verify the sequence. And they said, well, give us a time frame and don't go outside that time frame. And I remember when we were getting close to that allowance, I was starting to sweat a little bit because I was afraid someone would come along and throw me in a boiler. But
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a process. I think it made it take a few things take a little bit longer because of that and because we weren't trying to disrupt. So, we didn't want the occupants in the space to be uncomfortable temperature-wise. So, but it saved us from having to test in the middle of the night. So that was kind of the back and forth.
Does anyone other than Amy have a question?
This man has a microphone right here.
Sorry. Mark, what's up, bud?
Krista, you talked about an emergency generator test. Was that tying into existing critical facilities or the FAA systems?
As far as I know, this was only for the new parts of the CAP 2 project.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, so it was only for systems on the new CAP 2 project. It was just lighting and any of those new spaces that they added in was what the generator served.
Thanks.
Cool.
Scheduling for something like that and contractor readiness. Did you use a special tool? How did you manage that process? And then how did you bid something like that?
So the management was we actually did work on the design phase of this project, which was really good. So we got to build a good relationship with the owner's rep, and they had the contractors on fairly early. And so from the get-go, that you were having weekly meetings, and we were part of the regular weekly construction meeting, talking about commissioning issues and also talking about testing, right?
Yeah, it was about a year worth of site visits and commissioning meetings before we actually started commissioning anything.
Yeah, so there was a lot of time building teamwork, and so when it came time to testing, it was actually really nice. They were above board. We would get notices a little, sometimes a little bit too tight, but listen, we're not ready. Let's push it a couple days. So while we used the general contractor's overall project schedule, we didn't do anything separate, but it was because the entire team met that many times to actually continue to make sure that the schedule was shifting and flushing. And as far as how we came up with a number, you know how that works. I put down all these tasks and I put down all these hours, and then I said, I'm not going to get that much out. You're absolutely right. So what could we really do? What does it really need to be? And how does it really need to work? But once again, because we had done the design phase and the construction, it was nice. The design phase was one number. Construction phase, we came back and did a separate contract. So we had a very good understanding of everything that was in the project, that relationship with the owner, so we could just have an open conversation about how many meetings, here's what we're thinking, how many times on site, and same as you, detailed proposal that listed all those things to box us in. Even though there's a number of owners that say, you can't tell me how many meetings, it's as we need, or how many ever hours on site. And I always kind of question, do you tell the sheet metal guy it's as many pounds of sheet metal as I need and you get one price and that's it? But yeah, thank you for the question. Any others? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just had one. I'm just curious about the baggage handling and everything. Were the nature of those issues that you encountered during testing, when they fixed those, were those mostly like programming issues, or were they actual mechanical issues, or?
Yeah, it all pretty much came down to that computer system. So I don't know a ton about the programming and everything that goes into it, so can't speak to that too much. But it would be, we go back to that control room, they do a few things on their computer, then we come back out and retest it.
Cool. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. With the advent of fan arrays and drives being, oversped, I'll use that term with air quotes, beyond 60 hertz, there's going to be a lot of technicians that are good intentioned that are going to see that and not believe that's correct. And so, I'm intrigued by the issue that you had with the phantom fan frequency fiddler, and how you overcame that and how you helped the owner so that in the future they may, for example, not have a situation where a drive breaks and they end up just it being set to 60.
So Krista sat out there one night by the VFDs hidden with a chainsaw. And when they went to reprogram it, she just fired it up, and that was the end of it. It worked. It was done. In all seriousness, it was a education, and that goes back to the training side, right? You have it a lot. If there's a bypass on those drives, they're going to go to 60 hertz. You're going to be short on air, right? The first step was getting their staff understanding, the facility staff, that the individual who was doing it was 60 hertz is imaginary, and as long as we're not over-amping the motor and we're still within the tolerances, that we're actually okay. And so I think that the signage, I don't know if did the signage eventually go up where it was like almost like it was on the, we basically said put on the drive, speed should be operating at X hertz.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No.
I mean, the chainsaw thing was fun though, right? You enjoyed that?
Yeah, that was blast. Highlight of the project.
So did you have to check with the manufacturer that motor could be overamped like that, or overhertzed, if you will, and the warranty still held?
Yeah. Politely, yes.
Yeah.
Once we knew it was going to go into that range, right? Hertz is just something you're worried about the amps. So when you look at the motor, you see a lot of these fan walls. Where I think you were headed was we're starting to see units come out where motors are 8.5 horsepower rated motor, which is, how do you replace that? But from that's something to look for and not allow, because that's something they're going to just change it with a 10, and who knows if the rest of the electrical system will go. But no, it was looking at the actual amp draw during the startup to see where it was at, see is it outside of the service factor so that we weren't damaging the motor. And yeah.
Yeah, because I've had manufacturers say that if you go over, they don't do the warranty, even when it's within that, so we had to push back.
Yeah, I would agree with that, except for when you get them to write it down on the startup form that at X hertz it was so many amps, and that proves to them that they were there and witnessed it and set it up that way. Right? I say that it's sometimes those manufacturers' things are really weird. We just had a job with heat pumps. The manufacturer had in their documentation that you couldn't activate the heat on the heat pump unless it was colder than 60 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And I said, well, how do you do startup? And when it's low in refrigerant and the coil freezes up, how does the technician not pop it into heat to thaw the ice out quicker, right? But it's now in their documentation. So we physically we had to come back on a different day to test the heat mode because they wouldn't allow it. The engineer of record said, no, you're going to avoid the warranty because it was in their documentation. So looking at that warranty, just that aspect of looking at this warranty, making sure you're not voiding it is very important, right? And so the instance that you're bringing up, yes, we were able to work around it, but there's times where it would have been a lot harder to do that.
Yeah, we had also there on the ERV with the wheel on there we had a topic about the speed of that wheel and what was the minimum speed, and kind of for the same reasons. And the mechanical contractor was able to reach out to the manufacturer and kind of clarify what the speeds for that should be for kind of the same reasons. So a little bit different of what we were expecting. So fortunately, we did ask them about it.
Oh. You got a question, Art?
Yeah.
All right.
Christy, you did a great job in your presentation.
Thank you.
Awesome. The conveyor belt baggage claim, or conveyor belt for the baggage, I do have one question. It sounded like you functionally tested it twice. Was that, or you might have done it several times, I don't know, but was it done twice because you did a simulation, you explained?
The auto and then the
Oh, yeah. There were different stages for the testing.
Okay.
They were in different phases. So it was like 1, 2, and I don't know. The numbers felt a little random based on the BNP who created the tests. But each phase had then different subsections, and so they were kind of gradually increasing, what the capabilities are of the system. So I was able to witness a certain part of it, but this was a multi-week-long process where they did go through all of those different phases. So it was the automatic computer system, but then if something fails, they need to test how that manual system works, and if someone puts in a certain parameter, does the bag get to the right place then?
So the simulation, you said they used pots or buckets or something, right?
Yeah, they used like baggage
I'm just
tubs.
curious because of theme park projects and stuff I've done. Were they actually weighted
No.
to simulate no?
No, yeah, that
Okay.
wasn't part of any of the tests that we had. It was just about, again, like the size of the bag and then ultimately like what destination it needs to go to. Weight wasn't a consideration
Okay.
to get
I was
it
just
onto the
curious.
conveyor belt. That is probably a part when it goes onto the airplane, which is why they weigh it, when you first check it
Right,
in.
right.
But as far as the testing goes, the conveyors can handle pretty standard weight luggage.
All right, great, good job.
Any other questions?
Hey, last call. Any questions? Okay, if not, I think we give a big applause for the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.